Welcome in our studio here, Voice of Russia studio, on the Economic Forum in St. Petersburg, General Director of World Trade Organization, Mr. Pascal Lamy. Thank you very much for joining us here. And the first question will be, of course, in regards of problems of world economy and what was said during the G8 summit here. So, do you agree with the measures that the leaders declared to take in their communique? And what do you think of the world economy problems that they stressed during the summit? So what did they say? Taxes, trade, and the ways to solve it. Taxes, trade, and transparency.
As always, leaders are a bit more optimistic than reality. But if they were not optimistic, they would not be the leaders. So we obviously have a three-speed recovery from this crisis. Many developing countries doing well. Most, if not all, developed countries doing less well. And somewhere in the middle, countries like Russia. Now, I think where they focus, which is tax harmonization, is a proper thing to do at a time where you have to raise taxes. It's understandable that citizens want to make sure that what they pay on one pocket doesn't go in tax evasion in another pocket. And that's fine. And by the way, I personally think it's a good result of this crisis. There were calls for less tax discrepancies in the past. They were not heard. The crisis has changed. On the trade side, I think if what they say they do, fine. They want to resist protectionism, fine. This is what WTO is about. They want to finish an important agreement by the end of this year that would reduce very substantially the cost of crossing borders because of customs procedures. Fine with that.
Yep.
Provided, of course, what they say around the table of the G8 translates in the negotiating table in Geneva, which, to be frank, is not always the case. So all in all, I think the signal they've sent, which is that more trade opening is a low-cost contribution to stimulating a world economy which needs it because of a high level of unemployment by historical standards, is a good signal. Again, remains to be seen whether this will percolate, translate where we are, which is on the ground of the road workers of negotiations.
So leaders stress that WTO still plays the leading role in the world trade processing, but there were still concerns about this Doha process and some other things. So what can you say in regards of this?
No, I think these concerns are well-grounded and well-founded. The WTO is very efficient in implementing the rule it has. For the last 10 years, it has struggled in amending the rule book, which needs to be done because the world economy and world trade is not what it was 20 years ago when the last edition of the rule book was published. And this necessitates political compromises, mostly between rich countries and emerging countries, which are the part of the developing countries which have grown the fastest and which have taken a large part of world trade, such as China, India, Indonesia, Mexico, and again, Russia being somewhere in between. So this readjustment from a world where the rich were strong and the poor were weak, you now have developing countries who become powerful. And this implies a readjustment of the rules of the game, which is still not there. And by the way, you have exactly the same problem in international negotiations about climate change and carbon emissions. It's a striking parallel in the difficulty to decide whether China is a rich country with many poor or a poor country with many rich.
Okay, talking about the growing countries and their potential, Russia now is the member of World Trade Organization. So there are many concerns and many rumors about the advantages of WTO for Russia. But what do you see the main advantages for WTO in Russia for your organization?
By joining WTO, Russia has subscribed an insurance policy against protectionism, which will have a high value in the future. Today, Russia exports roughly 3/4 of its exports are commodities or raw material, which are areas, goods, which are, let's say, less prone to protectionism because people import them because they don't have them, they need them. Now, we all know that the economic strategy of Russia is to diversify. Now, as Russia diversifies, as Russia grows its economy outside of the energy, natural resources area, as it starts adding more value, Russia's exports will be more sensitive to protectionism.
Yep.
And this is at that time that the real value of having subscribed this insurance policy for the price of opening a bit more its market will be the most obvious. In the meantime, Russia is doing what new members of the WTO are doing. They are going through this transition, that progressively the Russian market is a bit more open, and progressively they have a bit more access to foreign markets. This is taking place, but the impact, the benefits, the price for joining WTO is not something you can assess short term. It is long term.
Okay, and talking about European economy and the problems are still on the table, and we had just this crisis in Cyprus, and etc., etc. So, what do you think about the future of European integration? Still, there are many concerns about this.
No, I understand that, and I see that, and I hear that. True, European integration is going through a very difficult period. Not the first time since 50 years. And there has been, let's say, integration crisis since Europe started to integrate economically and politically 50 years ago.
Yeah.
But this time it's probably more of an existential crisis because the crisis has revealed that in order to integrate economically, you have to integrate more politically. Now, this is a problem for some. Because some members of the European Union accept that economic integration means political integration at the end of the day. Others are less enthusiastic for that. And this inevitably creates turbulence. My own guess, for what it's worth, and I spent, as you may know, 15% of my professional life in Brussels, 10 years when I was chief of staff of Delors, who then was the president of the Commission, then 5 years as a commissioner. My own sense is that European integration will survive this difficult period, although it will have probably slowed integration by, let's say, an order of magnitude of 10 years, which may be a problem because the speed of the integration of the world is increasing. Globalization is progressing every day. And it will also probably result in some sort of a further differentiation between those members of the club who agree to more solidarity, more union, and those who are less prone to pooling sovereignty. So there probably will be a new set of geometry. And by the way, we've already had that in the past. Look at the euro, for instance. Not all members of the EU 28 on the 1st of July this year are members of the Euro.
So Mr. Pascal Lamy says that there will be a new geometry. So this is very interesting thing to say that.
I think we've seen the premises of that. When you look at free circulation of people, for instance, the degree of openness of EU members is slightly different. When you look at the monetary union, some are part of the euro, others are not. When you look at the banking union, which they are now constructing,
Yeah.
we know full well that members of the euro will have to be part of that, whereas non-members of the eurozone will have the option of joining or not. This is what variable geometry is about.
I see. So, and the very last question. Today you joined the discussion about the regional integration and the world integration processes. So the main question was, is there any competition between the integrational processes? So I heard what you said, but still here in our studio, can you just say your very own opinion shortly just about this? Is there any competition or not regarding the competition that is taking place here?
No, I think
in Russia.
I do believe that regional integration is one of the conducts to harnessing globalization. We will have more regional integration in the future because there remains a premium to deep economic integration with your neighbors rather than with real foreigners. The question is not whether it will happen, it will happen. The question is whether this will be conducive to multilateral global convergence or whether this will lead to global multilateral fragmentation. When you look at what's happened for the last 50 years, multilateral trade and economic integration and regional economic and trade integration have gone hand in hand. There has been no contradiction. Take the example of the European Union. The integration of European countries within a single economic space has never led to obstructing international trade. On the contrary, the EU, which is more integrated than 40 years ago, is also more open now. That's the lesson of the past. Whether this will work for the future or not remains, in my view, an open question, because you now have sort of transatlantic or trans-Pacific or trans-Asian big negotiations going on, the purpose of which is to enlarge the perimeter of common market rules, and whether all these negotiations, which are for the moment being considered or launched, will be compatible, will be coherent, we don't know. That's an open question, and it is a very important question for Russia. Because for the moment, Russia is in none of these big potential deals. China is, EU is, US is, Indonesia is, Japan is. Among the big economies of this planet, Russia is like Brazil, or like the Gulf countries, or even like Africa, in the 20% of the world economy which these mega deals do not cover. So it is an important question for the strategic future orientation of Russia's insertion into the international economy.
And the future of the tax union that we are building, and just let us make it clear, the future not for Russia, but this integrational things that we have on the post-Soviet.
I think it makes sense again to enlarge the size of the market and to level the playing field regionally. But you cannot, for an economist, you cannot compare an EU-US agreement
Yeah.
or a US-Japan agreement to a Russia-Kazakhstan agreement. Those are different kinds of animal.
Different
The
scale.
construction of a Eurasian economic space is more like what Europe did, what Central America is doing, what Eastern Africa is doing, what Mercosur tried to do, what the Gulf Cooperation Council tried to do, so the sort of classical regional integration process, rather than one of these new virtual animals which the Trans-Pacific Partnership or the Transatlantic Partnership might result some years ahead to construct.